Omateo, Tsencatlazokomati. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for scooting in closer. I really want this to be an us, not just me up here. Hopefully we can dive into some deep topics. We have our altar here, our sacred fire, and the elements here. We're going to be talking about some really important things far beyond what's going on in the so-called psychedelic renaissance. We're going to dive deeply tonight, and so we'll be talking about some intense topics, but they do need to be talked about. And we have a container here. Please, if you feel an emotion come up, please feel it. I think a lot of grief might come up, and that's necessary for the work that we need to do. So I have some copalito right up here, and just take off a little chunk. And so we don't want to offer anything heavy, anything that we're kind of, hey, I don't want this anymore, to the fire. It's more of gratitude, of thank you so much for what I'm feeling. Thank you for life. So always gratitude. And we had some tissue around here. If you can bring that back out, please. But most of all, I mentioned this is just what we need to talk about, and it's not talked about, at least for the 2+ years that I've been involved in advocacy work, first beginning against Proposition 122, which is now SB 23290, the Natural Medicine Healthcare Act, whatever it's officially called. So today, unearthing the root causes of our collective struggles, nurturing intergenerational healing of land and people. So these are calls to action, both personal and collective and political. My name is Gabriela Galindo, Tonali Teopapalot, and I am an Aztec dancer here in Tehuayo in Boulder Valley. My family is from northern Mexico, from Durango. We've been there probably about 200 years or so that we know of. Truly don't know how long we've been in that region. So I'm a mixture of various different indigenous lineages from what is now the northern Mexico, and likely have some lineage from what is now southern Colorado and New Mexico and Texas. And I really always make it a point to honor where we are. And we are on Ute lands. We are on Arapaho lands. We are on Cheyenne lands, and Apache lands, and 48 other tribes who have passed through here and hunted here and lived here and danced here and traded here, and everything that we think of human activities was done here. We'll talk a little bit about the history of how Colorado came to be. And I'm just really honored. My elders are not here today, but I'm just really honored to be walking in a good way, to be always walking with consent with them and be communicating what the work that we're doing and always seeking their advice and having that reciprocity with them, which is really important when we're working with indigenous communities and with Black communities as well, and really all communities, right? So we have to bring that reciprocity back in. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited. Since we've talked, I think in December, so much has transpired. And in my mind, so much of what I wanted to bring up has really changed. But here we are, and I think what needs to come through is gonna happen. Okay, so this is, there's an app, and it tells us exactly where we are. Right, once again, honoring where we are. Turtle Island, Anahuac, Tahuantinsuyu, South America is not on here, but all of these lands are indigenous lands, right? We've been here since time immemorial. We've heard the Bering Strait theory, which was about 13,000 years ago, but there's some footprints in White Sands, New Mexico, that show that we've been here for about 23,000 to 26,000 years. So imagine how much it took if we came from the Bering Strait, or a large group of people came from the Bering Strait, how long it took to get to New Mexico. A long time. So those footprints were left over a period of 1,000 years. So yeah, it really goes to show that our origin stories, a lot of our traditions have origin stories that, go far. I think it's nice to think of before time existed, because that's really how long we've been here. I also really felt grief so much. I know we're experiencing so much collective grief. And whereas sometimes in these spiritual communities, and I'll share a little bit about how I came into this work, we don't really talk about it. We know it's there, and I feel it, when I'm in ceremonies, when I'm in sweat lodges and our traditional ceremonies, like it's just so, it's almost tangible, and yet we don't talk about it. But I can see it. We can see it in the way that we walk, in the ways that we act, in the ways that we're really in a multitude of crises. We're in a mental health crisis in Colorado. We're in a global climate crisis. We are in a housing crisis. We're in a food crisis, a housing crisis, you name it, it's a crisis. And it's happening not just here, but everywhere I've traveled, it's the same issues. So this is also, what I'll be sharing is systemic, right? It's institutional. So while there's personal healing that we need to do, there's also lots of systemic healing that we need to do, and lots of naming what is actually going on in these systems, because otherwise we just continue to perpetuate the same cycles, and that's how we're here in the first place. Also, we have a variety of people here today. I'm an Indigenous woman, also have Spanish lineage and African lineage. So this is a BIPOC series, but I know that we have such a diversity here. So some of the messages, some of what I'll share may or may not apply to you, only you know that. So I'll be sharing kind of little tidbits about, what certain people of this lineage can do, or what people of this lineage can do. As an Indigenous woman who does social justice work and environmental justice work with the government and with my community, it gets really tiring to do this work. It's really tiring to have to carry the burden of speaking to these systemic issues all the time. And we're tired, and we're called resilient. Our communities are called resilient. And although I like the word, because my ancestors are really strong. They walk in a really strong way when we honor them, when we do our ancestral work. But I also don't want to do this forever. My dream is that our communities don't have to be resilient all the time, because we've been carrying the burden of protecting Mother Earth and protecting our traditions and protecting water and soil for so long, that it would be wonderful if folks came in and helped us with that burden. Okay. Yeah, I'm sending all of you love, because wow, what a show, yeah? And this grief, there's so much about grief, and I've heard for a time, like, hey, let's be grateful, like let's befriend the grief, and yeah, of course. But I remember when I was in a herbal botany field course, and it was really beautiful. We were traveling all across the Front Range of Colorado all of last year. We learned plant identification, ethical harvesting, and we had some really hard conversations around the impacts of colonization. And I remember just feeling the grief, all this massive grief, and I felt like I was the only one. But I could feel the land. I could feel all of the grief in the land. And some people were like, I feel grateful for it. And I was like, I don't feel grateful. I don't feel grateful that the Native people are not here to tend to their lands. And I'll get into that a little bit more on what we were doing. We were doing some ecosystem restoration. But I didn't feel, I said, no, I'm not grateful. You know, I want them to return and to be able to take care of their land. So the grief is just enormous, and we welcome it all. Before I get into that, would anyone feel comfortable sharing on just a few words, like a couple of us, like what are some of the things that you're grieving or that you find yourself constantly grieving?
I can go. I am constantly grieving the fact that we are damaging our own future. Mindlessly, sometimes mindfully, and that we don't see that we need to leave this earth better than we found them for the generations in front of us, just the way that they did it before us.
Yeah. Thank you for the copalito. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share? Yes?
I feel like I am always grieving just like the mass like abuses and violence and abuses of power that are like happening inside of the psychedelic ecosystem. That really gets me.
Yeah. Thank you. Marty?
Thank you for the question. I'm grieving probably, child's play. Just the reminder to just have fun and find joy in what we do.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
I'm grieving industrialization, how quickly the Front Range is being developed. I grew up here, and it's really hard to see all these like big open plains and spaces just start to get filled up with these cookie cutter, copy paste homes that are just really harming the land. That gives me grief.
Yeah. Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I'm grieving a lot of things, but I'll mention just one or two. I'm grieving the way the education system is, and the fact that children are told that they don't know anything and that what they learn is inside this four walls with fluorescent lights, and that they grow up disconnected from the land and the spirits of the land, and then later we have to go do a lot of work to reconnect with that which is our birthright.
Thank you. Suppression is also a symptom of colonization, specifically settler colonization, which was the project here in Turtle Island, and the way that the United States continues to function and operate and perpetuate. So part of that project is suppression, right? And we see it still actively right now, which is the media is suppressing, the government is suppressing what is really happening globally, and even still the history of Colorado. I couldn't find it, but I was on CPR, it was a few weeks ago, and this happened a few years ago, I believe, but it was still when Governor Polis was in office. But there was a school board, I believe, in Jefferson County. I may be wrong about the county, but the students really wanted to learn about the Sand Creek Massacre, and they voted, like they were protesting and doing walkouts that they wanted to learn about it. But the school board said no. So they were not allowed to teach that, and that was just this one county. But at the same time, the governor did sign a bill that all Colorado schools need to teach the Holocaust, right? 100% we need to know about the Holocaust, and 100% we need to know about the Sand Creek Massacre, right? And the reason was they just didn't want the children to know about what their state had done. And that continues today. In 2021, Governor Polis also signed rescind. So since the middle 1800s, there was a law, right? There were many policies and laws that allowed or incentivized and promoted the killing of indigenous people and the theft of their lands. So only in 2021 was that rescinded. So still recent history, right? The suppression is still happening. This marker here, the Sand Creek Battleground, the language is really important because it was a massacre. The people were unarmed. There were about 230 men, women, and children who were told that they would be left alone, that there would be peace, that they could surrender. It was Cheyenne and Arapaho people, and they were massacred when the sun was rising on November 29th and 30th, 1864. Many of the soldiers rode in from Boulder, the Wayo. And so we have this here, site of old fort chambers, and it says, used during the Indian uprising. So again, that points to that it was a war, that it was equal, that they had weapons, that they had any chance of surviving, that they had any chance of fighting, and they did not. Okay. And then up here we have children being taken away in Canada in the boarding school system, which only in the last couple of years have Native communities been able to have the funding and the support to investigate further what happened. Although the Indigenous peoples had known, but it was never acknowledged or it was suppressed for so long. So hundreds of years ago, and we're still uncovering the tragedies that happened there. So another thing is repression too, right? Because we also, like in my family, we have been forced to forget to a point where we forget and we suppress and we repress who we are as Indigenous people. And so we have the caste system over there on the left, that was in Mexico. So we have the European, the Spanish at the very top, and then the Indigenous people at the very bottom. Going back to that, we have internalized oppression, right? Just as we have Indigenous people or Black people who also, we've internalized our own oppression, right? I remember I did grow up in the suburbs, and I think I was just too young to realize what was really going on. There was a point where it was very clear. In high school, our principal made it really clear that we were not welcome there. And I was one of the few people that spoke Spanish and was from Mexico, but made it really clear that he didn't want us there. So I internalized that. I was embarrassed when my parents spoke Spanish, and I was even embarrassed when people came and talked to me in Spanish, like, how do you know I know Spanish, And now I love it. Like, yes, of course, sí, claro. I actually do it now, like, all the time, I talk to everybody in Spanish. So it's just not necessary to do that anymore. Let's be proud of who we are. And there's more, right? There's a lot of DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that are being, what's it called? Like they're being taken out of legislation. Affirmative action as well. So we see that any chance that, any chance of equity or any chance that Black and brown people or people who have been oppressed have to have any kind of equal footing, it's going away. And that is really concerning with this next presidential election. And I really like this one. So I do spend a lot of time on social media. I follow a lot of social and environmental justice leaders. And it says, I'm always disgusted when a politician says they will be tough on crime. And that usually always means more criminalizing and police force, right? But what is tough on crime? A living wage, right? Affordable housing, childcare, guaranteed access to healthy food and the end of food deserts. And I also want to say about that, like, it's great, but it's also like still within the system, right? It's still like, okay, damage control, putting Band-Aid on things. And I'm in a lot of these conversations with government leaders, with representatives, and even something as simple as affordable housing. We just had a gathering yesterday, and it was so passionate. And we're like, oh, have you tried this solution? And then it would be like, oh, but if we do that, then this and this and this and this and this. So like, 20 other reasons why that won't work, because then it affects like the landlords, and then it affects this. For a minimum wage, Boulder County has done 2 years of community engagement. And it's like, wow, even just paying people a few extra dollars, but they were like, we have to engage with these people, these people, these people. And I said, wait, so you've done 2 years of this engagement. So let me ask you this, when these big companies want to raise their rates, do you ask the community for 2 years how they feel about it? How about that? Can we do that? And they were just stunned. So I'm always shifting the narrative of like, that's wild. Why isn't it the other way around? We also get called terrorists, honestly, terrorists for defending land, right? How many, what happened in Standing Rock, what happened with Enbridge Line 3, what happened with all of these pipelines, what happens when Native communities and Black communities are protecting their communities. This one here about the activists was in 2017, and that's really, there's a lot going on with Cop City right now if you're following that. But the militarization of the police force is also, I think I've heard it's gonna happen here in Denver too. So rather than funding more of our communities, the decision is to militarize the police more and keep voices like mine oppressed. Also through data, right? We're also erased through data. So Native people are erased, right? And most people in certain areas are still like, whoa, like if they see a Native person, because most have been taught that we are not here anymore, right? But also through data, right? There's so much corruption that happens in research and statistics. Okay, and difference is also something that I think many of us all have done, and I think it's intentional and unintentional because there's so much that when you have to worry about your basic needs, you cannot tend to too much outside of caring for your basic needs, especially if you have 2 or 3 jobs, are struggling to pay your rent. But there's also big time and difference happening at the government level, right, and all these different levels. So one thing that's happening is that we have to transition to clean energy. It's a fact, right? And governments have like a really big, like, all right, by 2030, we're gonna be all electric. And I'm like, okay, what's your plan? And they're like, we're gonna put solar panels on everything and everyone's gonna drive electric cars and we're good, right? Because we have clean energy now, we're carbon neutral, right? And then I say, well, that's not really transforming the systems. You're still keeping the power at the top. You're not really transforming anything. You're just continuing to give the power over to the energy companies, and they're not talking about how the solar panels and the electric devices are made, right? So there's environmental violence and injustices and genocide happening in Congo and Sudan, and most of that is child labor and massive displacement too. So I bring it up and nobody really says anything. Oh, actually, yeah, I won't say who they are, but a top person in the Capitol, they said, well, we try not to source that from outside of the United States. So I said, yes, I know that you're getting cobalt from the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I know that you're getting it from reservations in Oregon, and I know that where you're sourcing this is from primarily indigenous communities and reservations. As people of color and all of us, we have been trained to believe that these injustices are inherent, right? Like, oh, it just is what it is. Like, that's just the way it is. That's a colonialism. That's racism. Okay, this is a big one, y'all. Bear with me. We are gonna get to, we're gonna shift, but we've got to get through this, yeah? So in spiritual communities, or when we're wanting to root into any kind of spiritual work, or when I think in many walks of life, one of the reasons that we understand that we have a lot of illness is because we're separated from nature. And yes, that is 100% a big part of that. But then what happened after that, right? What the projects of colonization were that then everything needs to be privatized. So the Colorado River, when they came through the gold rush here, through Boulder, through Denver, and they needed water. So they decided to privatize the Colorado River, El Rio Colorado. And right now, currently, it's water for 7 states, including Colorado. And they did not include any of the indigenous people. There's a water rights system. It's really complex, but basically first come, first serve. So, and you have to use it or lose it, and it's basically a business deal. And that's how I've heard representatives talk about it, of like, we're good, like everyone has all the water they need. The federal government stepped in 2024. Yeah, I think it was, I'm a little lost on time, but it was either this year or last year where the Fed said, hey, you have to get it together, otherwise we'll come in. But if you don't know, the Colorado River is endangered. And it's gonna get really serious, but in the conversations that people have, it's lawyers, it's state entities, and mostly their solutions are, well, really no one wants to make cuts, but they'll have to make cuts. But their solutions are like cloud seeding, or map more diversions from other rivers, which those rivers are also in trouble too. So there's a whole list of rivers that are endangered, and most of it is agriculture and pollution. And I mean, you're talking about not just like not having enough water for people and for life, but for all life, but they're also, these dams are extinction of all life around it. So destruction of entire ecosystems and species related to damming and agriculture industry. So for Native people, it's you know, we have 2 options, right? Before it was give up our land or go to jail. Give up our rights or go to jail, and now it's give up your water or go to jail. So even though we're in the middle of droughts, the massive amounts of water, I mean billions of gallons a year, are still allowed, no questions asked, for oil and fracking industries. And then, you know, Coca-Cola in Mexico, there's a big drought, and it's Coca-Cola, it's these big companies, it's Nestle, who knows what's going on in the communities and actually takes advantage of that and exploits the communities and privatizes their water. So most of the problems that we're having is the privatization of healthcare, the privatization of land, the privatization of air, the privatization of water, the privatization of healthcare, the privatization of education. I mean, I can go on, but I think we get the idea, right? These systems aren't sustainable, but it's like we're in such a deep addiction to whatever this is, capitalism, that it's so unhealthy, and naturally that just really doesn't happen naturally unless there's a big imbalance, which it is. It's a massive imbalance. In biology that's called cancer. So, yeah, and just a little funny, like, can you imagine if somebody privatized air and literally started air for profit? That would be crazy, lots of love. Anyways, I gotta go pay my water bill before my landlord kicks me out of my apartment. So just a little more, we have to just name, we have to name exactly what the systems are and the barriers, otherwise they will keep being invisibilized, right? So let's be more precise with our language. And for example, being black is not a barrier for me. White supremacy is the barrier. Being female is not a barrier for me. Patriarchy is the barrier. So let's name those systems of power. Those are the barriers. So we often hear like our communities referred to as marginalized communities or low income, and those are mostly names that the system has given us, right? I don't enjoy talking about race, but we have to do it because I didn't racialize myself. Like our communities were racialized, and then based on that identification, then everything was systematically taken from us, right? Because of the color of my skin and the language that I speak, and for being Indigenous, and for many of us here, that is the reason, literally, of life and death. And we have to be honest, right? I always we have to be honest, y'all. We can't get to this place that we really all want to be. We all want community. We all want love. We all want to be free of these systems. I try not to generalize. Some people actually do want to be in the system, and have faced a lot of resistance, right? Because we've also been told this is the only way, and I'm saying that, or what we're saying is that these systems are new. We've lived in reciprocal systems. Sure, Indigenous communities were not perfect, but we were reciprocal, and we had relationships with nature, and we are not driving the planet to extinction. So it is who the United States is, it is who Canada is, and we have to be honest. And as I mentioned, DEI protections are going away, and certain people are calling it didn't earn it, right, DEI. But that's wild, because in reality, generating historic wealth through 2 billion acres of stolen land from Native Americans and enslaving Black people and banning women from financial access is literally the living, breathing example of didn't earn it. How does this tie into the psychedelic movement, y'all? It's literally exemplifying everything from colonialism and all of these systems. So it's actually, sadly, it's not really a surprise that it's happening this way, right? It's not, at least not for me, when I'm like, oh yeah, that's a pattern. Oh yeah, of course, because I kind of pay attention. I encourage you to pay attention to those patterns, right? They're cyclical, they've been in action for a long time. So one of the things that we really see is love and light, right? Let's not talk about these things. No, it's low vibration, or I don't see race, or, we're all one, which is true. We are all deeply interconnected. But when someone tells me, Gabby, I don't see race, or tells our communities, we don't have to talk about these things, it's actually really harmful, because we need you to, the action that these master plant medicines and Indigenous communities and Black communities, what we really need is action. We need you, of course, for our own personal and family healing, but we also need that in action. Otherwise, we're bypassing, and we can't get to this beautiful place of dismantling these systems and creating new ones. So too often, we are doing activism work, and we're told not to be angry about it. We're told let it go, is in the past. And I think where the racism part really hurts is I don't think that you would say that to people of Holocaust, people who lived through the Holocaust, would we? So why do our communities have to get over it? We are still suffering very deeply from the intergenerational, and it's not just in between generations, it's not generations to generation, it's also a cultural wound, a cultural trauma, cultural pain of an entire tribe of all of the Native people here of the United States. So most of what we're healing through is this deep, deep pain. Much of what I've talked about here, but it's like our entire community and it's our land. We're grieving to be on our lands and take care of our lands and be in community and share love and tend to our traditions and our children, and we can't do that. Well, we can't do that because the system doesn't recognize our self-sovereignty, doesn't recognize our right to self-determination. And then here I have, I have non-Native folks who are consistently propped up as the experts of Indigenous traditions and medicines. MAPS is not on here, but MAPS, Chakruna and other organizations continue to erase us. So what happened in Colorado, because when we got wind that this was happening, we had to organize, and of course community engagement is so important, and I'm 100% for equity, yes, equity, but it's still relatively new for governments to do any kind of equity work. So the conversation was everybody has a voice, right? Everybody can talk about these medicines and these traditions. And what we're saying is that these are traditions of specific Indigenous and African communities. And so how can the entire state of Colorado, Colorado is only about 1% Native American, and probably even less than these are in relationship with these traditional medicines. And then most of the medicines also are not local to Colorado. So we have traditions from South America, from Mexico, from Africa, and they were not in these conversations. They were excluded. We were excluded. So we didn't have pre and prior informed consent, which is by law, it needs to happen tribal to tribal nations. So equity is genuine, legit equity would be for us to be leading those conversations, for our elders of the respective communities to be leading. And that's why I say it wasn't really a citizen-led initiative, because it wasn't led by us. Right? It was not led by Native people, and I don't speak for all Native people. I speak as one of them. We did not, the people in my community did not support it. All right. Yeah. These are the communities of these medicines. These are the people of these medicines. We're black, we're brown, we're red. These are the real faces of the communities and the people who have, despite everything, continued to maintain their connection to their communities. And the medicines are a part of that, but they're also facing severe issues of water infrastructure, clean water, soil. Displaced. There's the US and Canada and Western Europe participate in the displacement and the destabilization of Native communities worldwide. So when we're talking about privilege, it's really a privilege to be able to say, well, that doesn't affect me. when in reality, most of what the United States has is because it's all being sourced from Indigenous communities and Black communities. Shared goals, y'all, we need to work together to create a better future for future generations. We really do. If this checking out, this bypassing, you have obviously you can keep doing that, but is that really the legacy? Is you turning away from what we've discussed tonight, from what our communities are voicing, from what Indigenous communities of these medicines are voicing, is that you have a choice, you know? I personally have shared this work is hard, but I do it because I have seen, and because this is the reality of our communities, and it is the reality of your communities too. It's the reality of all communities. We're moving through and trying to heal through so many crises, and it's still within the system, and like it's not working, y'all. Like, let's be honest, it's not working, right? We also, one thing I'll just go back to, when we're learning about Black history or Native history, it's just taught as our history, right? It's like, it's white history too, it's European history. Please take responsibility in that, and then instead of, you know, saying that's not who we are, say, well, that's not where we want to be, and what can I do to change it? So as people of color, as Indigenous people, as Black people, I really would encourage us to really root in a beautiful way to our traditions and our lineages. When we're talking specifically about coming into medicine traditions, that we also don't come from a place of entitlement of, you know, well, I'm this lineage, and I'll use me as an example. I didn't do this, but if I, you know, found out like, oh, I'm Wirarika, which I am, or Huichol, and I said, you know, I can speak for all Wirarika people, and like, I think this and that and that, and that's really tricky because I'm not a representative of the Wirarika people. I have, unfortunately, I have some connections, but I absolutely, in any way, shape, or form, cannot speak for them, nor center myself, nor do anything that will violate the rights, the human rights that they have and don't have. Y'all, that's the seriousness of it. Of what we saw was continuously seeing people not from our tradition center themselves and misrepresent us and speak for us. And it's like, wait, you cannot speak for a tribal nation. So it's really important that we're aware of, first of all, where these medicines come from, and always continuously centering the people most affected. Yeah, we're not, the reason we're in a global climate crisis is because our knowledge has been invalidated. We don't really see the effects. I mean, we're starting to see the effects with the extreme heat and the rain, actually. The increased precipitation. If we look at the global system and the patterns of climate and weather, it's not climate change. Like, that's actually not even a debate. It's either climate chaos or climate crisis. And we had the opportunity to meet with Pacific Islander representatives last year, like the top of the top, the creme of the creme. And when they told us, they were like, hey, they want to meet with you. They want to they want to see what you guys are doing, like how you're engaging with communities here. And we just laughed. I was like, they're coming to learn from us? Like, no, we're going to learn from them. And sure enough, they were like, there was a woman that was like kind of, you know, really reserved. And then I was like, hey, what's going on? And they came from all the different Marshall Islands, and they are actually in deep trouble right now. Their islands are sinking, and they might not live there in the next couple of years. So I said, what's going on? How are you? And she said, the United States is causing all of this. Like, your country is causing all of this. And I said, I know. I'm so sorry. We're doing everything we can to, we're doing everything we can with our local government to speak to this, right? And then once we said that, like, yeah, I know, like, we want to learn from you, not the other way around. And she, like, we recognized that, you know, and she just loosened up. But that is the truth, that the reason we're not really seeing the effects here, well, the US, Canada, and Western Europe are primarily the 3 biggest polluters, and the rate of oil and gas and carbon emissions is off the charts, and the most impacted communities globally are the communities called the Global South, so primarily African and Indigenous communities all over the world. I really love this, y'all. Like, in a t-shirt, some of the things stirring in my head of, all right, well, what are the solutions then? Yeah, if y'all remember DARE, right? I remember DARE. Manita, ¿puedes cuidar mi fuego? This is care, right? And people get scared when, I think some people get scared, I don't get scared, but for people defund police, why? Because we could really use those funds in community building and supporting the capacity of our communities to know. A lot of the work that we do is the communities are the experts of their own needs, right? And for so long, it's been the government not engaging with us, not bringing us to the table, and we're flipping that around and saying, like, nope, that abuelita, that grandmother who only speaks English, like, you are going to take the time to listen to her because she is deeply connected to everyone in her community, and you will be present with her. You know, we went to the Capitol not long ago, and we had 5 minutes to talk to a representative, and we caught him in the hallway, and there was like this debate in our group, you know, and one of the guys was really strong, like, no, we need this, I'm trying to be nice about it, but this beautiful white woman to speak for her, because she knows English, and we need to do it fast. And we're like, nope, we do not agree. We came here, we did this massive effort to bring this woman, we've been working with a mobile home community right outside of Boulder, literally across the street from the boundaries. And the boundaries have been weaponized and politicized. So the city is like, we don't have to do anything. It's outside of the city boundaries. And the county is like, well, it's unincorporated, so we can't do anything about it. So this has gone on for 20 years. So Boulder is one of the wealthiest cities and counties in Colorado. And because of political boundaries, and I'm indifferent, and it's not my problem, we have a community of mostly immigrant who don't have, it's a clean water crisis. Like, for real, it's in your face, and Boulder doesn't want to see it. So anyhow, we said, no, she's the expert. You're gonna take the time. And sure enough, took all the time. We got about half an hour with him. So it was really beautiful to decenter ourselves, which is another call of, like, when we're doing ally and accomplishment work, we step back and we center the most impacted communities, which I think this can be our conversation piece. Most of this can apply to the psychedelic space too, right? I've talked about centering the most impacted communities. Don't speak for us, represent us, misrepresent us. No tokenizing, right? Like, oh, I talked to this one Native person and they agree with me. And we see people from our own communities who are propped up, and we're like, oh, actually, we don't support them either. But don't be extractive, right? We also have this culture where we don't, in general, Western culture does not honor their elders, right? So when we are consistently saying, like, build relationship with Native communities, but there's a lot of extractiveness going on and exploitative behaviors and dishonest behaviors. and there's no transparency or honesty going on. Another call is that we use our power, like power and privilege appropriately, right? I mean, I speak English, I was born here, I have a college degree, I have a car, and knowing what I know, you bet I'm gonna do everything I can to use my voice in a good way. So I'm using my privilege and my power to bring in people and to make sure that I'm speaking to what is necessary for them. And a lot of it is decentering myself. However, when we're talking about ally and allyship, like, I don't have the power. Systemically, my power has been taken away. So if you have money and power and privilege and a platform, please use it. Please use it to amplify our voices. Please also like step back when it's necessary too, right? We can kind of play with our power and privilege as needed, but always following the guidance of the community who is trusting you to do that work with them. Please educate. We have to educate ourselves, right? Even with Black communities and Indigenous communities, we don't understand our histories, and we have to understand our histories. That way we can be in solidarity, right? We have a lot of shared history as well, but it's also really important for people in government or in all these places to educate yourself on history and the current events, because it's all connected. And please learn about it from our lens, right? Written by Black and Indigenous people and people of color. Really, I think I should have made this really bold. One thing that we really hear pretty often is that Indigenous communities and elders wanted to share this medicine, right? But they're like, but they want us to, Gabby. They really want us to. And I'm like, yeah. We know you need the healing. We know that there's so much healing that needs to take place. But that does not mean that then we can betray the communities and the elders and the traditions and commodify their medicines, commodify their traditions, extract and exploit them. It doesn't mean that we can create a whole entire state legislation built exclusively on the traditions of Native and African peoples. It does not mean that then we can make decisions and speak for them, and it doesn't mean that we can create a whole industry from that exchange. That exchange did not give anybody permission to do that. So, what are other ways that, we can be good relatives to one another? Oh yeah, question. There's a question. Yeah, thank you. Gatekeeping is up there. Yeah, gatekeeping, we've been having these conversations recently because, hey, okay. I don't do a lot of mocking on purpose. It's just like, this is just the way it goes down, right? Like, okay, but Native traditions are gatekeeping, right? These medicines are for everybody. And again, we know that our communities know that people really need the healing. And so this is kind of used like, I don't know what the interpretation, como un arma de dos filas, how do you say that? Like, yeah, it's weaponized against us, I'll say that. Because naturally, and each community has been different, right? There are many tribes that are open, like some of it is cultural, like, hey, we don't really like go or mingle too much with other traditions, and some are really open. Some of them are really protective because of the impacts of colonization, and so they're very, very tight-knit, right? So we've also just have naturally, like when we're talking specifically about medicine or traditions, like certain people are taught in the community, right? Usually in some way or another, the community or the elders make a decision to teach this to this person, right? It's cultural preservation. So do we gatekeep? I think protection or safeguarding or doing things in a good way is what's most applicable, but when it's used against us of like, hey, these medicines are for everybody, do you understand that Native people are still criminalized and persecuted for healing with our own medicines on our own land? Do you remember the American Religious Freedom Act and the amendment in the 90s that our Native people fought really hard to be able to be Native because we were criminalized for having feathers, for having our dances, for having our traditions. And it wasn't the US that was like, oh my gosh, like we've been so unjust to Native people, let's have these protections. It's always our communities who fight. And this is another thing, I didn't talk about the legal system, yeah, but the legal system, like, what kind of reparations, we need to reclaim reparations and mediation processes with our communities because a lot of that has been taken away from us, and we don't know how to do that. We don't know that, like, we're working on this project now, and we're like, how do we actually hold the government accountable? And like, everyone we've talked to is like, there's no processes. Even a good friend just left. She's like, I can't do it. There's no way that we can actually hold or have conversations with government officials as community members when they're harming our communities. But I also just recognize that our own communities, we've been forced to forget our mediation processes, and so we need to bring those back. Questions? Yeah, as you can see, thank you for bearing with me. I'm really passionate and I share because I've lived through it. I do this work in community, and it's really necessary that we talk about this. So,
in light of everything that we've talked about, the behemoth feels so big, right? Like the system is so big and it's been in progress and in motion for 200 years plus, right? How do you inspire hope for people who are starting the collective work now, or who want to, or are just getting started? Like, how can you give them hope when it feels so daunting to begin with? Like, the system is so big, and even just taking a little chunk of what you can manage, how would you even help someone get started?
Do you have any kind of spiritual practice?
I don't, so I am, this kind of like is the starting point for me. I'm a reconnecting mixed Native, so I'm on the beginning parts of that journey, but I just walked away from a 12-year career in an extractive industry, and I'm trying to leverage my proximity to power and privilege to build a better future, not just for myself and my daughter, but for the community, because we do need a better place to live, and we have to start now, but it's so big to even think about starting. So like, I don't even know where to begin on a personal level, a professional level, and it's overwhelming, and I'm sure that a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah, so thank you. So in a summary, it feels really big. There's a lot, it's overwhelming, and where do we start? And I think there's many ways we can start, but a good place to start is to, I think, always like come back to grief, like have grief processes and cry a lot, move a lot, like whether it's singing or dancing, and at the same time we can begin to make offerings. Especially with our ancestors, there's so much work there, but going outside in nature and, offering, like start building a relationship with a tree or a plant, and start singing, start talking, start making offerings, and asking for that guidance. And any kind of like embodiment practices that allow you to move, whatever you're feeling. And the other layer of that at the same time, I think sometimes we shy away from, at least when I started this path, like I had so much grief and I was like, I don't want to hang out with my friends because I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but like rebuilding those community connections, right? Like fortifying our relationships with our friends and our families, and starting to talk about it with them, because chances are they're also going through really hard things, and we really can't do this work without community. Yeah, we need each other. I felt really alone for a long time, and that's why social media has helped me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many people that think like me, or wow, y'all said it, but like, you know, you said it in such a good way, where movements, right? We are, like, the work that I do is only sustainable because I have my community who supports me and I root in, but also because I remember that all of the social justice leaders, environmental justice leaders, the civil rights movements leaders, like there's so many movements all around the world. And so we also don't have to like recreate everything. We like can tap in and ride the momentum and, you know, reach out and learn on kind of how those movements, what they've learned, what they've gone through, and how we can strengthen these movements, because this is a movement, right? The psychedelic movement is like, oh, what do you want us to do? Like, if we can't stop it. And I'm like, yes, you can. It's a movement. And a movement is made of people. So if we all came together and said, you know, we're not moving forward with this without the consent of Native people, it would stop. Right? There's power in numbers and communities, so we feel powerless when we think we're alone, and we're not.
Thank you, Gabby. Which I think brings it back to what you were saying earlier about individualism, and why individualism is such a colonial byproduct, because when you are alone, you lose hope, and then you comply. You just become a nice little soldier. And that's the reason why community is a big target of colonial and capitalistic entities, because there is power in numbers.
Thank you.
I guess I asked this question on behalf of like conversations I've had with my white-bodied friends that are wanting to be like, in a good way, allies and really understand and go through all of these things of listening through our lens. And I always hear from like my white-bodied friends, like it's so hard to like find that community without like, I don't know, maybe going to a community that is different from them. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, like for white-bodied people, how they can connect back in that way.
What I'm feeling, I didn't always feel this way, but it's just where we are right now is, and it's what I see so much, is the grief. Having grief rituals, we're really honoring the ways that, because these systems and colonization has really impacted primarily Indigenous and Black communities, but the other side is that now there's so much deep intergenerational pain on white-bodied folks as well. And I'm sharing grief as part of that because there's just a lot of grief that needs to happen there, and kind of what they did to themselves, right? And I think those are good ways to start building community, and and learning from each other, of like being committed. Like I think for me, like doing this social justice work is so important. So like having these conversations, doing the education, and then so often people come to I've seen how people come to our tradition, to our like sweat lodges, right? And ideally, hopefully, it's a way that they can see that like the elements, right? The water and fire belong to, we're stewards of, for all people, stewards of water. They don't belong to a specific tradition. But hopefully it's like a way, if they connect in a good way, to start helps them like oh yeah, like my own lineage has these traditions as well, and start like the revival of that, right? So like during COVID, massive amounts of Black people and Indigenous people were like, oh my gosh, I have all this time, I'm gonna reconnect, I'm gonna learn my language, I'm gonna learn our dances. And it would be nice to like start building that collective movement to like remember pagan ways, remember like those European lineages and traditions.
I'd love to know what kind of advice you have for people who are in spaces of advocacy and education who are getting exhausted by the work. I live in a white body dominant community, so I also find myself in like a really frequent space of education and advocacy, and I've been in that space for a couple of years, and there's definitely times where I feel like I'm really in my flow and making a lot of progress and feeling like I'm really walking in a good way with my ancestral medicines. And then, you know, there's instances where I feel like sometimes I'm still bumping up against commodification or even pedestalization of our medicines, and I get really fucking tired of it. And so then I tap out for a second, and that kind of speaks to what you were saying about, you know, when we get lonely, when we're not with our community, that's where we become blinded, that's where we become good soldiers. And so I would just be curious, like, what advice you have for us to like stay in it and maybe even like fight that toxic individualism, like you were saying, which is like, I need to preserve, when really like we do have to take care of our basic needs, but that shouldn't mean opting out of like the community work that's really needed.
I relate because I go through these cycles all the time. And are you in government, if I can ask?
No, I'm in the birth work space. Yeah, so I do a lot of like restorative birth work justice.
Are you are you interacting with the government or the legal system often? Okay, and it's a community that you work with, right, of birth workers?
Yeah, I work in a community. I'm also working with like a very diverse clientele.
Do you work with do you have to work with the Department of Regulatory Agencies? Okay. Let me think about that one, because I think our work is a little bit different, but I'm going to see if I can. If anybody else wants to add too, because I do actively work, but I still understand that. I prayed a lot for a mentor with experience, because they have experience like going through these cycles. Like I'm still kind of a relatively new activist work versus somebody who's got like 20, 30 years under their belt. The importance of making it sustainable, right? Of having the practice, having the elements, having your tradition and your practice is so important. Having a community that you can root down in, and for me, maybe this helps, is rest, right? And that's actually really hard, because I'm like, I have to, like, if I don't tend to it, you know, and I've actually been practicing that for the last month, I think for the first time. But I would encourage you to rest and re-nourish and know, like, that there's people, like the work is still happening whether or not you're there. I've learned to trust that because the education piece is really, like, the only way to make it sustainable is to have people like kind of on your team or on your side who are like educated and can speak to that when you're not there, right? Like, hey, it's getting a little too much for me, can you come in and support, right? So your allies and accomplices in the workplace can do that.